All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. As I was telling Kirsty, we're right in the middle of winter here in Utah, and so the topic of travel is on the top of my mind. This is when I would start to get the urge to go somewhere warm, somewhere tropical. And so I'm excited to be here and share some things with you that will hopefully help you to build rapport and build loyalty with your clients that you're working with. And to give us kind of a case study to look at, a few months back I was reading an article in the BBC about a touring company called Pink Jeep Tours, and they were looking at how this company was able to be so successful, how they were able to build such loyalty in their clients. They looked at a couple of different data points. I mean, one of the things was they had a net promoter score, like a customer satisfaction score, that the Pink Jeep Tours always scored very, very high on. People seem to just love and are attracted to the tour guides that they hire. And when I dug deeper, it pointed out that the people that work there are getting lots of training on soft skills and how to interact with their clients with the purpose of trying to build those connections. They get 150 hours of training. And this article delved into what was, if you could name one thing, what would be the one thing that was building such a strong connection, that was building such loyalty with the people that were using their services. And I'll give you the answer near the end of the webinar, but the material we're going to go over today is going to help you as you're working with your clients or as you're working with other people to help build rapport and to help build loyalty. A little bit of background about me. My name is Jeff Baird. I'm based in Utah in the United States, and I do business intelligence during the day. And then in the off hours, I do speaking engagements at conferences, and I'm a corporate trainer on technical and soft skills. And I'm also a certified body language trainer, which is kind of odd. I didn't even know that was a thing until several years back. What a body language trainer does is teach people, there's kind of two sides to this, teach people about their own body language and about the kinds of messages they're sending so that they can be more deliberate and so they can take control of the messages they're sending. And then also to recognize emotional cues in other people so that they can better understand what other people are feeling and what they're trying to communicate. I started studying this for a bunch of different reasons. I had lots of weaknesses in this area myself that I wanted to fix. But one of the catalysts for me starting to study this topic was actually Disney's Inside Out. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this, but the premise of the movie is that all of us have these 5 little characters inside our head that represent 5 basic emotions that all human beings have. Things like joy and sadness, anger, fear, and disgust. And it's these characters inside your head that take over and take control when you're feeling these different emotions. And there's one scene where this family all had to move from their home, move out to San Francisco, and the little girl Riley's having a hard time adjusting. And at this scene at the dinner table, the mom notices that there was something bothering her daughter. She started picking up on the nonverbal cues, the body language, that something was bothering her. And so she started probing and trying to ask her what was, if everything was okay. And the dad in this dinner scene was completely oblivious that anything was going on. He's sitting there eating his food and he's thinking about hockey and was missing these important cues that there was something bothering his daughter. And his wife actually even tried to signal to him non-verbally, hey, I need you to engage here and help out. And so when I saw that scene, I've got 3 little boys. I didn't want that to be me as a dad. I didn't want to miss important cues if something was bothering them. And not just at home, in my career, as we're interacting with everybody, there's those same cues that can be indicators as to what they're feeling. And I didn't want to be oblivious to that. I wanted to be able to recognize what those cues were so that I could understand people better. So I started studying body language, and some of the material I'm going to share with you is the fruits of some of that studying that I've been doing and as I was getting certified and started teaching people. So to start out, as Kirsty mentioned, we're going to try this poll thing out and see if it works. So those that would like to participate, you can use your phone or you can go to this address. And what I'd like you to do is I'm going to show you a picture of an individual, And without thinking about it too much, I want you to just type in one, maybe two words about what pops into your head. What's the first word that pops into your head when you see this guy? I'll give you a couple minutes to get to the address or to get the text set up, and then I'll show you the picture. And while we're doing that, let me make sure my poll is active, which I think we're good. Give it a couple more minutes here, and then I'll show you the picture. All right, hopefully you're all set. Okay, what word pops in your head when you see this guy? And if we don't get any responses, that's fine. Ooh, intense, that's a good one. Give it a couple minutes here and see what else there is. And show the picture again just in case. Now, I'm kind of a data geek as part of my business intelligence background, and sometimes we'll use a word cloud like this to get some sentiment analysis to see what kinds of feelings people have around a certain topic or around a certain individual. Criminal, that's an interesting one. So I've done this experiment with a bunch of different groups from all over the world, and there's some really interesting things that happen when I do this experiment. The first one that I find fascinating is how quickly our brains are starting to make decisions about this guy. We're making decisions about whether we like him or don't like him. We're making decisions about how much we trust him and how competent he is. And one of the other things that's fascinating is those sentiments, those feelings that we have, tends to be very consistent across all different groups, across all different kinds of backgrounds. In December, I did a series of webinars for different areas of the world. We had South America, we had Africa, we had Europe, and they all had very similar sentiments. Every now and then you'll get an outlier that's not quite the same, but it's surprising how consistent it was, even though they're all from different countries, different cultures, different background, which hints that there's something here that's just part of how we're wired as human beings. Let me show you another example of a word cloud from a previous group. Now with these word clouds, the bigger the word, then the more frequently that word comes up. So this word cloud's got some funny ones in here. It's got Hunger Games, about to draw a pistol, wants to kill me. Some interesting sentiments there. A little more background about this guy too. He is a CEO of a job recruiting company. And so if you were to go to his website, he's changed it now, but if originally when you go to his website and go to the About Me page, that is the picture you'd see. And these are the kinds of feelings, the sentiments that people are having about him. And from this word cloud, intense, criminal, the artist one, that one's interesting. So these are the kinds of feelings people have about him, and by association would start to have those same feelings about his company too. So that's kind of bad news as a CEO. The third thing that I find fascinating about this experiment, though, is how the sentiments also match what some of the scientific research around body language would suggest would happen. So, for example, scared and scary, those are common ones that come up. In this word cloud, those are the biggest ones. One of the nonverbal cues that he has going on is he's got lots of white showing around in his eyes. His eyes are pretty big. When we're in fight or flight mode, when we're scared or when we're ready to fight, oftentimes our eyes will get bigger so that we can take in more peripheral vision. So research would suggest if we see that kind of a cue, it starts to communicate to us that he's either scared or scary, which we see in the word cloud. So our brains are making these decisions very, very quickly. It tends to be pretty universal, and it matches what research says should happen when we see certain nonverbal cues. All right, let's try another poll. I alluded to this one in the abstract. What I want to show you this time is two pictures of people that are running for political office. And what I want you to do is to try to guess, using just the picture, who won the election. So let me set up this other poll. Activate this one. And I probably won't have a huge sample size with this, but that'll be all right. Okay, you ready? Just type in a 1 or a 2 based on which candidate you think won this election. Okay, now we're going to actually do this with 3 pairs of candidates. Here's the first one. So out of number 1 and number 2, who do you think won the election? And while you're typing that in, this study it was aired actually on National Geographic's Brain Games, which is, for nerds like me, it's a fun show that you can watch. It's on Netflix, and it has lots of these fun games and experiments that give you some clues into how the brain works. Let's see what stuff we have coming in. All right, so far, 100% of us are saying that number 2 won the election. And that is absolutely correct. He is the one that won the election. Okay, let me reset my poll, and we'll do the second pair. Okay, out of this pair, who won the election, number 1 or number 2? Okay, this is a little more split, a little more tricky. Most people, when they see this one, say that number 1 won the election. And that is, in fact, who won out of this matching as well. Number 1 won the election. Okay, let's try one more pair. Number 1 or number 2, who won the election? That one is more universal. Number 2, and yes, number 2 is the one who won the election. So again, similar to our previous experiment, it's interesting how quickly we're making decisions about these people. What this game is based off of was a study done by a Princeton psychology professor named Alex Todorov. And what he found was that with very little information, even just a picture of someone running for office, people can guess who won the election with about 70% accuracy. So 70% of the time, with just the picture, we can guess who won the election. And that blew my mind when I first heard about that study. And if I'm being honest with myself, it bugged me a little bit, especially given that I have data background. I would like to think we're voting for people based off their experience or their principles or their background, not how good their self-he is. But it's a powerful predictor on whether or not someone will get elected. And he said that there was 2 traits in particular that we're looking for in someone's facial structure to decide whether or not we're going to vote for them. And what he said was that those 2 traits were trust and confidence. If they look trustworthy and confident, they're more likely to get elected to office. And what I've found is that with any of our social interactions, it's the same. Those are just as critical. If we want our clients that we're working with to want to work with us more, to have loyalty, to use our services more, they need to see trust and confidence in us as well. And it all starts with that first impression. Now, some of these cues that are sending messages of trust or confidence, some of them are static that we can't do much about. If you've seen my picture, I don't have any hair. There's not a whole lot I can do about that. I can't change how tall I am or how wide my face is. But all those things can contribute to how people perceive us. Fortunately, there's dynamic cues that we can change. There's things we can deliberately change about our body language that will communicate trust and confidence to people. And so that's where we're going to focus today, is on those things. Based on this, Professor Todorov actually came up with an algorithm of electability that he could put candidates through to see how electable they are. And he took all the major presidential candidates from the last United States presidential election, and I wanted to see which ones were the most electable. And if you follow that at all, it was interesting that the 2 people that rose to the top from his algorithm as being the most electable was Trump and Hillary Clinton. His algorithm said those were the 2 that were the most electable. And Trump actually edged out Hillary a little bit in the composite score from the algorithm. So even on a national scale where there's lots of other information besides just the picture, it's still a highly correlated factor in whether or not you get elected. Part of the reason this happens, part of the reason it's so powerful, is because most of our communication that we do with one another is nonverbal. Depending on the study, it's anywhere from 60 to 93% of all of our communication is nonverbal. And if you're like me, I tend to spend maybe too much time when I'm preparing for an important meeting with somebody or a presentation. I spend a lot of time focusing on the verbal side. I think a lot about what I'm going to say and may not spend enough time thinking how I'm going to say it. But that's the bulk of the communication that's going on when we talk to people. In a 30-minute conversation, two people can send over 800 nonverbal signals back and forth. That's body language, that's tone of voice, facial expressions, all of that stuff. That means in a 30-minute conversation, you're sending 400 signals to them. Are you sending the kinds of messages that you want to that are going to be building friendship, building rapport, building trust? And they're sending 400 signals back that are giving you clues as to what they're really feeling and what's going on inside their head. There's even some research that suggests that of the two, verbal versus nonverbal, nonverbal is 12 to 13 times more powerful. And you can see this if you go to a restaurant where maybe the waiter or waitress is having a bad day, and verbally they say, "I'm so happy that you're here," but maybe their voice is monotone or really low, and they're rolling their shoulders forward and drooping their head down. If what they're saying verbally doesn't match their nonverbal, we're going to tend to believe what we see more than what we hear in the words. Very, very powerful way to communicate. So what I'd like you to start thinking about is what kinds of messages am I sending, particularly with my clients, and are they the right kinds of messages that are going to build a stronger connection and build loyalty with them. And I'm going to give you 3 tips today, and a bonus one kind of slipped at the end, but 3 tips on non-verbally how you can build rapport and loyalty with those that you're working with. And what we're after here, just so we have a point of reference, is to find a balance between warmth and competence. So Professor Todorov said it was trust and competence we had to see. If we have a balance of warmth, openness, and trust, which you see here on the y-axis, but still coming across as confident, competent, and powerful, then that's the sweet spot where we get admiration and respect and influence, and people want to be around us and they want to use our services more. If we slip into one of these other quadrants, then we're out of balance, and we're not going to be able to have the same kind of influence. So what we're going to do today is focus particularly on the warmth, on that Y scale. Things we can do to come across as more likable, more warm, more open, and trustworthy. Now, part of the reason, one little more piece of background, part of the reason this is something that we can rely on, something that's effective, is it's rooted in a very primitive part of our brain. And in our brain, we've got these 3 different segments that roughly go up the revolutionary ladder. And it starts with the reptilian complex, or the brainstem. If you think about what kinds of things reptiles can do, they run around, they eat, they try to find a mate. It's all very instinctual. They do have fight or flight response to keep them safe, but they don't do a whole lot more than that. We have that same part of our brain that is designed to keep us safe. Way back in our caveman days, this is the part of the brain that would keep us safe from the man-eating tiger. It's also the source of a lot of our instinctual body language. Even if we're trying to suppress and hide our feelings, stuff can leak out from this part of our brain because we're just wired to do that, and because it's a very fast-acting and very powerful part of our brain. If you go up the evolutionary ladder a little bit to the limbic system, or sometimes this is called the mammalian brain, that's because mammals have it, then we start getting some of the higher level emotions and bonding with one another. This is something that lizards don't have, but if you have a dog or a cat or something like that, they have this part of the brain, which is why a dog or a cat's more likely to cuddle up with you and make you feel warm and fuzzy inside than cuddling with your snake or your lizard. Both those parts of the brain are very honest and very fast acting, and like I said, often leak out what we're really feeling and what we're really thinking. This is also the part of the brain that you have to appeal to when you're working with someone. If there's a part of the reptilian complex called the amygdala that's kind of like a meerkat. If you've seen those little meerkats that climb out of their holes and stick their heads up to look around to see if a lion's coming or a tiger's coming to eat them, that's kind of what the amygdala's job is. It's scanning the environment for potential threats. And so that part of the brain is always monitoring, always watching. And if you want to make sure that you can appeal to that part of the brain and to not put it into fight or flight, because then you're not going to have trust and the people aren't going to like you and want to work with you. So there's a little neuroscience 101. Let's talk about then the very first tip. This very first tip on how we can start to build trust is actually based on some research done by a former FBI agent named Jack Schaefer. Now, Jack was tasked with some interesting assignments. He was asked to do things like turn a foreign diplomat come work for the United States, or he'd be sent into a room with a spy shackled to an interrogation desk, and he'd be asked to try to get information out of these guys without using torture or anything like that. His approach was to go in there and try to build trust with these individuals. I can't imagine a more difficult scenario to try to do that. Going in, there's going to be zero trust. There's going to be suspicion. The person's meerkat's definitely going to be on alert. But even in that circumstance, he found a pattern that over time would start to build trust and build friendship to the point where they actually would start to divulge information and start to work with them. And he says this starts, similar to our experiment with the pictures, it all starts with the first impression, the very first time we meet the person. And he suggests a cluster of 3 nonverbal signals that you can send to someone that tells them you're a friend. Every time we meet someone, they're going to categorize us as a friend, as an enemy, as potential romantic partner, or as completely irrelevant. That friend one is really where we're trying to get here so that we can have those professional but strong connections and relationships with our customers. So the cluster of cues, it starts with an eyebrow flash. And if I was on video, I could show you what I mean, but it's a quick flash of your eyebrows where your eyebrows shoot up your forehead. It's kind of a nonverbal way of saying, hey, how you doing? Or what's up? I have an 11-year-old boy, and he was telling me the other day that a girl was kind of flashing her eyebrows at him and smiling at him. And he asked me, he says, Dad, is that a body language thing when the girl does that? I was like, yes, son, that is a body language thing. Do a quick eyebrow flash, and that's a signal to their primitive brain that I'm a friend. The second part of this cluster is to do a head tilt, which you can see in this picture. Not an overly steep and aggressive one because that looks awkward, but a slight head tilt. A slight head tilt does a couple things for us. It's a nonverbal way to show that we're listening, that we care about what someone's saying. And it also, we're exposing vulnerable areas of our neck. And in doing so, we're showing that we trust them. Animals will also do this. If you have a dog or a cat, if they tilt their head, then that's a way that they show that they trust you. So eyebrow flash and a head tilt starts to say, hey, you can trust me because I trust you. Now here's an example of it at a conference I went to last year. And when it was time for question and answers, she opened up the questions and tilted her head to show that she was listening, made sure her hands were down to her side and that she was open. The third part of this cluster is to smile. And not just any smile. There's actually such thing as a fake smile and a real smile. A fake smile is kind of like the one you do for your family pictures when you don't really want to be there. Or if you have one of those friend enemies, the frenemies, that are smiling but they aren't really happy, they aren't really feeling joy. That's one kind of smile. A true smile from the emotion centers of the brain, you can tell because it'll engage muscles around the eyes. You'll start to see these crinkles around the eyes that show you that, yes, this is a real smile versus a fake. And at the University of Finland, they actually found that if people looked at pictures of a fake smile versus a real one, the real ones would actually give you a boost. Your mood would start to go up a little bit. They did not get that same mood boost when it was a fake one. Our brain can pick up on the difference. So as much as possible when you're meeting someone, try to give them a true, genuine smile. And if you can't do it genuine, then at least smile high. Smile high up into the cheeks where you're getting those eye crinkles, and that will send a friend signal to their brains that you're friendly. So that's tip number one. When you first meet someone, first impression, quick eyebrow flash, slight head tilt, and flash them a genuine smile, and they're going to like you a little bit more as a result of this. That's tip number one. Tip number two, here's a question to think about. When we first meet somebody, what part of the body do we notice first? And maybe a different way of putting this, what part of our body does our inner meerkat, that primitive amygdala, what part of the body does it notice first? Most people think that it's something around the face, like the eyes or something like that. But what our brain actually notices first when we meet someone is their hands. Our hands are powerful trust indicators. This is so powerful that they found that when jurors are on the stand, when jurors see someone on the stand, if they can't see their hands, they'll see them as more sneaky and less trustworthy. This goes way back again to our caveman days. If there was some caveman we didn't recognize coming up to us, and we were trying to decide if he was a friend or a foe, we would look at his hands to see if he was carrying a weapon. This is actually why we started culturally shaking hands. It was a way of showing your hand and showing that you didn't have anything there that might harm someone. So even though we aren't in the caveman days anymore, it's still subconsciously, if we can see someone's hands, we're going to trust them a little bit more. And this is kind of an interesting example from one of my colleagues. Most of the nonverbal cues are the same between these two pictures, but gut feeling, which one would you want to work with the most, or who would you trust the most? Most people think the one on the left where his hands are showing seems more trustworthy. So usually the question that follows with that then is, well, what do I do with my hands? If I'm like I used to fold my arms a lot or keep my hands in my pockets, if I need to avoid that and use my hands, then what do I do with them? It feels awkward. We could probably spend 2 hours just talking about what to do on hand gestures. We don't have that much time. So I'm going to show you one clip, and hopefully the sound will come through all right. If it doesn't, then I can just explain it to you. But this clip is going to have, this guy's going to ask the audience to do something 3 times, and he's going to use the exact same verbal content and try to keep most of the nonverbal cues the same, but he's going to change what he does with his hands each time he asks it. And as you're watching this, see if it feels different to you, depending on what he does with his hands.
I'm going to say the same thing 3 times. I'm going to change only what I do with the palms of my hands. Now I keep my body fairly still, so I don't use any other body signals to infiltrate this. And I'll keep my voice as close to the same as I can. I'll say as close as I can because we know that when you change your body language, it's hardwired in your brain to change the way you sound. So I'll try to keep it as close as I can sound-wise. And I'll use exactly the same words, same instruction 3 times. Now your task is to decide, do you accept what I'm saying? Do you want to do it, or do you reject me? Do you want to fight me, or do you want to go along with it? You want to say yes or no. That's all you've got to do. Okay, we're clear on this? Here we go. First instruction. Now don't do this, just imagine this is what we're going to do. Now in a moment I'm going to ask the people who are sitting in these seats here, I'll invite you to come and sit on the side of the room please, and I'll invite the people here to take their seats. Now those in the back of the room can come forward to the front, and those of you in the front can sit anywhere you choose. Now raise your hand if you feel okay about what I'm asking. Who feels okay? Raise your hand. Okay, so just about all of you are prepared to do what I want. You don't even know what it is, but you're prepared to get up and do what I want because you feel like I won't threaten you, I won't intimidate you, Ellen won't make me look silly. This could be a bit of fun. That's what your mind's thinking because I use a signal that appealed to your ancient brain. Let's try the second instruction. Same words, same voice, changing only the palm. Here we go. Now I'm going to ask the people sitting on this side of the room here, I'll invite you to come and take these seats, and the people there, if you can sit over here please. Those at the back, come forward please, sit here, and those in the front can sit anywhere they like. Give me a word that goes with this. What are you feeling? A word. Okay, who feels like you're getting an order? Raise your hand if you got an order. Okay, think about this. So are you telling me that all I have to do is change my palms from upward position where you wanted to do anything I wanted without question? Now I've turned it over. Now you're saying to yourself, hang on a minute, this guy's giving me an order. Well, maybe I don't want to do that. I'm an independent. I'll just check it all out. Make me laugh, funny guy. So now, many of you are resisting. Let's try the third approach. Now, I'm going to ask the people sitting in these seats here, if you can come and sit over this side of the room, please, and those seats. I can sit here. At the back of the room, if you can come forward, please. Sit here. And those in the front can go anywhere you like. Now, give me a word that goes with this, a word. I guess that was a word. What are you feeling with this? Well, this is more than an order. This is a directive. You have no choice, and you're an idiot. So we tested this in a very simple way.
So hopefully you could hear that, but and hopefully you could feel it too. When he asked the audience to do something 3 times, just changing his hands, either palm up, palm down, or with the finger point, it felt different. And because that primitive part of our brain is interpreting the different gestures as different ways. I'm still a bit of a data guy, so I don't want to do it just off feelings. When they've done this experiment with groups of people, if they ask the group to do something with their palms up, 84% of the people are willing to do it. As soon as they ask with palms down, then compliance drops to 52%. Only about half the people are willing to do what they're asked. And then if they ask with a finger point, most of the people are going to resist. Very, very few people are willing to comply because it starts to feel more demanding or feel more like an insult. Huge amount of difference with just changing the orientation of your hand. This is one of the reasons why at Disneyland and Disney World they teach staff there not to point. Even if they're directing somebody to somewhere, they'll try to use open palm gestures when they're pointing to where someone needs to go because of how this is received. Now, it'd be interesting to see, I don't know Australian politics as much, but I know I see these kinds of gestures all the time in American politics because at least on the higher levels, these guys are coached on body language and they're trying to communicate openness and trust. So you see the same kinds of gestures as they're talking. They're trying to show their open palms to show that they're open and trusting. At least when they're in control of their emotions. When they start getting angry at each other and get upset, which is fun to watch during the debate, then you see palms come down and fingers start to come out when they're getting angry at each other. Here's an example of the Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton debate. Got an open palm and then a finger point. Okay, so try that. Try experimenting with your hand gestures and see if it changes based on who you're talking to and how you feel about the person. The next part from showing your hands is getting a good handshake when you meet somebody. A good handshake is worth 3 hours of face time because there's so much information that people can gather just from a handshake. And some of this will vary a bit based on culture, so you may have to adjust this a little bit. We're going to talk about some general principles about what makes a good handshake. A good handshake is going to be firm, but not too firm. Showing a little bit of firmness in the handshake is going to show confidence and competence. But you don't want to be overly aggressive. You don't want to squeeze the life out of their hands. When I was a teenager, I used to do a lot of rock climbing, and I used to think I had a pretty good grip. But there was this 60-some-year-old racquetball player that used to get a kick out of shaking my hand because then he just crushed the life out of my hand. And that wasn't building influence or rapport with me. It was just obnoxious, and it was more of a power play. So you don't want to do a limp fish. You don't want to do a floppy handshake, but you don't want to do too firm either. If you're not sure how firm to do it, I like to just roughly match what the other person is doing, maybe just a little bit more firm than them, but that shows confidence. The other thing with a perfect handshake is to try to keep your hand vertical. And so as shown in this picture, as opposed to turning your hand over the top of the other person's. By turning your hand over the top of theirs, that is showing dominance. That is trying to show more power over them. If your hand is underneath this kind of a handshake, that's more subservient. You have less leverage. You're exposing vulnerable veins on your wrist. This is where that term actually came from that you might have heard, that they had the upper hand. It came from this kind of a handshake. So unless you're wanting to do a handshake where you want to show dominance or subservience, then keep your hand straight up and down to show that you're on the same level with them. Another cool thing about handshakes, though, is what happens in our brains when we have some kind of human contact. And what showed this really powerful was an experiment this guy did. This guy's name is Vince, and he went out meeting people on the street, shaking their hands, and afterwards they would ask the people he met what they thought of Vince. And most of them, they have good positive things to say. On a scale of 1 to 10, they'd rate him as pretty average, as a 5 or a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10. Then Vince went out again, meeting people again, and he kept the same clothes, he kept the same body language. All he did was add a soft touch to their forearm when he shook their hand. And making that one change alone, all of a sudden he started getting 8s and 9s. And the reason for this is because our brains, whenever there is welcomed, appropriate human touch, will produce a hormone called oxytocin, not to be confused with Oxycontin. Oxytocin is one of a bunch of different chemicals that our bodies produce to make us feel good. This one in particular is called the bonding hormone. It helps us trust and connect and bond with each other. When you're cuddling with your cat, you're probably getting oxytocin, you're getting warm fuzzies. There was a guy named Paul Zak that did a bunch of research around oxytocin. On one experiment, he had volunteers snort high doses of oxytocin to artificially raise their levels. And when they had higher levels of oxytocin, they were more generous and trusting, even though it was artificially done. So we don't have to go around snorting oxytocin, and we don't have to pump it into the air or anything creepy like that. With welcomed, appropriate human touch, like in this kind of a handshake, oxytocin is produced by both people, and that helps them to connect and bond with each other. We also get oxytocin when we make eye contact with people. What you don't want to do, though, is take it too far. If you overstep your bounds and get too touchy-feely, like John Travolta here, then it gets creepy, and it does just the opposite of build trust. The way you can know, if it's a professional environment, then you need to err on the side of caution and not go too far. And you'll know if you've gone too far by watching and observing their body language. Are they trying to pull away? Are they trying to block with their arms or other things to show that they're uncomfortable? But if you do it right, waitresses have been seen to increase their tips by 41% just by incorporating some kind of touch, like a touch on the shoulder or a brush of the hand when they're handing them the bill. Librarians in another study showed that they increased their approval ratings just through the same thing, some kind of human touch. And that's because of that oxytocin that is building a connection between the two people. So that's tip number 2. Make sure your hands are visible. That's going to help them know that they can trust you. And nail that handshake. Make sure it's firm and vertical, but not too firm. And allow that to start building oxytocin and building trust. All right, on to tip number 3. Tip number 3 has to do with what we call mirroring. Mirroring is a way to show and to gauge interest. When we're around somebody quite a bit and we like them, if things are going well, we'll tend to start to get in sync with our body language, with our expressions and with our hand gestures and our posture. And so if you can see people start to mirror you, start to do things like you, that's a good sign. It means that you have good rapport. This is the actors from The Big Bang Theory. Looking at how in sync they all are, how mirrored they are, is a good sign. Probably things are going well on set, at least when this picture was taken. Charismatic people tend to do this just naturally. They will naturally, subtly mirror other people's body language, which is part of the reason they are so charismatic. Another interesting brain games I actually just watched about a week ago had these 2 avatars, these 2 digital people interacting with some volunteers. And you notice that they tried to make them as similar as possible. They got rid of the hair, they've got similar facial structure. But between these 2 heads, they just changed the nonverbal a little bit. The first one, Al, on the left, was showing some negative nonverbal cues. He was doing different type of head movements than what the participants were doing. Whereas Bob was mirroring everything that they did. They actually, on the backside, had this actor using some facial recognition software and looking at the participant on a camera. And with Bob, with the second head, all he'd do is just do exactly what they'd do. If they'd nod, he would nod. If they kind of bounce their head around, he would bounce his head around. If they'd smile, he'd smile. And what was interesting was how powerful of an impact that had on the people that were watching. People liked Bob. They didn't like Al. And the main difference was just mirroring their body language. Here's some other examples. Now, you don't want to overdo this. If you overdo mirroring, then it can look like you're mocking them or copycatting them. But if you subtly mirror what they're doing, mirror their posture, their hand gestures, their facial expressions, they're going to feel like you're on the same page as them. You're going to feel more familiar to them. You're going to be more like them, which is going to make them like you more in turn. They won't even realize this is happening, but it's going to help endear you to them more. The one caveat to this is if they're doing negative body language, if they're folding their arms and making grouchy faces, then those aren't the kinds of things that you want to mirror. But if it's neutral or positive body language, mirroring is a powerful way to help build trust. That Jack Schaefer, that same FBI agent, will use mirroring as well. And what he'll do when he's first talking to somebody is mirror them for a little while, and then he'll change something in his posture or his gestures or how he's sitting or standing and see if they mirror it back. If they do, then he uses that as indication that he's built sufficient rapport. If they don't, then he'll go back to mirroring them for a while until he finally gets the result that he wants. So that's tip number 3. Subtly mirror the body language that the other person's using. You can also do this, though, not just with your body language. You can also do it with your speech. So one of the other trainers that I work with, she tends to talk very fast, and she was meeting with a guy from Texas that had a slow cadence, a slow southern drawl. And at first, she could tell that he was a little irritated at how fast she was talking because she was watching for the nonverbal cues. And so she just deliberately slowed down the cadence, slowed down her speech. And this Texan let out a sigh of relief and then was able to have a good conversation with her because he felt like they were more similar, that they're on the same page. You can also do this with the types of words that you're using. You can adjust the types of words so that it matches the kinds that they're using. So that's tip number 3. And here is a bonus tip. This one is not body language, but it's still very interesting, something that takes very little investment, very little time, but can potentially get you a big return. And I call it the dinner mint principle. The Journal of Applied Social Psychology was observing what would happen with tips with waitresses and waiters as they gave people dinner mints after they ate. So they had a control group and saw how many tips the waiters and waitresses were getting. And then they had the waiters and waitresses give them a mint at the end of the dinner. And that actually boosted their tips by about 3%. Like, all right, that's cool. Then they did it again, and they had the waiters and waitresses give them 2 mints. So a little bit extra. And exponentially, not linearly, the tips went up to 14% just by giving them 2 instead of 1. Negligible cost, but already starting to see a better return. Then the third time they tried this, they gave them a mint or 2, and then they walked away. And then they came back and said, I thought you might want some more mints, and then gives them even more. And then the tips jumped up 21% from the base. And what I take from this is that it doesn't take very much. Some small gesture, some small token can greatly increase how loyal someone is and how endeared they are to you. You've probably seen this in the opposite effect. If you ever had a bad experience at a restaurant, maybe they didn't get your order right, or you found a hair in your food or something like that, the restaurant's response to that is going to quickly determine whether or not you're going to be loyal to that restaurant, or you're going to go on social media and start talking about how terrible that restaurant is. I don't run a restaurant, but I would think that the cost of one meal, if they would be willing to comp the meal or give a free dessert or something like that, that's relatively low cost for the restaurant, but gives you a huge return in loyalty, is probably worth the time. So this is something that you can think about. How would you apply to to tour guiding and working with clients, but it doesn't have to be much. Some small gesture or token that makes them, that feels personalized, that makes them feel special, they're going to be more loyal. I was talking to a dentist that was at some medical convention. So the whole convention's full of doctors, guys that are wealthy, have plenty of money. What those guys talked about as one of the perks, one of the coolest things about the convention was the fact that they had candy bars there for the people. Every morning when they come, they had candy bars. And these are guys that have plenty of money to be able to afford buying their own candy bars, but just that gesture, some little small token, and that's what they were talking about, and that's what made the convention more memorable. So think about how that might be applied. It might be a gift, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a physical thing. Just some personal gesture, something that shows you're going a little above and beyond, and with negligible cost and time will produce disproportionately positive loyalty. And if you don't leverage this the wrong way, then it can actually do just the opposite and hurt your business. So in review, what did he say? First tip is to, when you first meet someone, eyebrow flash, slight head tilt, and a genuine smile to tell them that you're a friend and not a foe. Show your hands, and in particular when showing your hands, and try to do palms up gestures and to make sure you nail the handshake. And as you're talking to the person, subtly mirror their body language, the cadence of their speech, how they talk, to show that you're on the same page with them. And as the bonus, to dinner mint them, to find something that you could leverage, something that you could give that would make you stand out and make them more loyal to you as a result. Now, as we started out with the pink Jeep tours, the question was asked, how are they getting such high NPS scores, and what were the fruits of all this training that they were having them do? The one attribute this article found that made customers loyal to pink Jeep tours and made them keep coming back for more was warmth. The people felt warm, and that's really what all these tips are about. And I'm hoping this is going to help you as you're working with your clients so that they feel that warmth from you and that they're going to want to come back for more and going to want to come back and work with you more. So that is my presentation. If you have follow-up questions outside of the webinar, feel free to reach out to me on your social media of choice. But until then, are there any questions I can answer?
Okay, thanks so much for that, Jeff. I think we're all probably, well, I know I am anyway, really, really craving some dinner mints now. Yeah, we will take questions now. So to ask, just raise your hand, and you can do that by clicking the participants button, and from there, raising your hand, and then I'll unmute you, and you can ask your question. So while you guys are doing that, I've got a question myself. So I know you talked about pink Jeep tours, and you know, a lot of this was based on giving speeches and directions, which I'm sure most of the research is on. You know, but aside from a good handshake and real smile and raise of eyebrows, is there anything you think specifically relates more to tour guides and providing that warmth? Because I think there's, you know, a bit of a mix for tour guides, you know, trying to be a friend, but also, you know, they've got to maintain at least a little bit of order and authority over the group as well. So I'm wondering how should people go about getting that balance right?
And the balance is critical in that 2x2, we want to show warmth and openness, but we still need to be seen as professional and as confident and as powerful. And so in this focus was mostly on that warmth spectrum. But while doing these kinds of things, one of the main things you can do from a body language perspective is power body language. So power body language is where, think about when you're really confident, or when you're having a really good day, or when you succeeded at something. You're probably going to have your head high, you're going to have your shoulders back, you're going to be a little more expansive with your arms and with your legs. That's a natural way that we show confidence and confidence. A study that they did with Paralympics that was very interesting. They did it at a Paralympics so they could get people from all around the world from different cultures. And in this study, they looked in particular at athletes that were born blind. So these are people that didn't grow up being able to see what the right body language was. But they found that these blind athletes did the same kinds of gestures that anyone else did. And one of the main things they did is if they won, if they're victorious, power body language. expansive with their arms and with their legs and shoulders back and head high. Low power is just the opposite. Low power, your shoulders are rolled forward. You're shrinking and trying to take up as little space as possible. Your head is dipped down. This is what we naturally do when we're afraid or when we're scared or when we're not confident. And so when people see that, if people see low power or high power, they're going to make decisions on how confident or professional that you are. And that's going to help balance those two out. So as you're showing all these warm and friend cues, show confidence too. Keep your head up and your shoulders back. And that's one of the main things that's going to contribute to you still coming across as confident and competent.
Okay, thanks so much, Jeff. That definitely answers my question. It looks like nobody else has any questions, unfortunately. I think we will have to do some more of those polls, though, in the webinars from now on. I think they were really fun. So thanks so much for joining, everyone, and thank you, Jeff. I hope you all had a great start to your year, and I'll see you all, I hope, in February for our next 2 webinars. So thanks a lot, guys, and see you next time.
Thank you so much.